The 90s. Arguably the golden era of gaming, where pixels ruled supreme and platformers were king. This was a decade where creativity exploded, mascots became legends, and consoles were sold on the strength of a single jump, spin, or dash. Platformers weren't just a genre, they were the genre. They defined what gaming was about back then. Fun, challenge, and unforgettable characters. But let's be real. This wasn't just about bright colors and catchy tunes. The 90s gave us innovation that rewrote the rulebook, pushed hardware limits, and changed how games were made forever. We're talking games that turned into a cultural phenomena, sparked rivalries, and carved out identities for entire consoles. In this list, we're diving into the top 5 platformers of the 90s. These aren't just the ones everyone remembers, they're the games that matter, the ones that still get referenced, speedran, and argued about decades later. From groundbreaking mechanics to unforgettable stages, we're counting down the best of the best, starting with a little dose of absurdity. So let's just jump in. Kicking off the list at number 5 is Earthworm Jim. If the 90s had a game that truly embodied weird, this was it. Released in 1994 and developed by Shiny Entertainment, Earthworm Jim was a platformer that didn't just stand out, it refused to blend in. It had a hero who was literally an earthworm in a robotic supersuit, wielding a blaster and whipping enemies with his own body. It didn't take itself seriously, and that's exactly what made it unforgettable. But don't mistake its absurdity for lack of substance. Earthworm Jim wasn't just about goofy humor. It had tight gameplay and inventive level design to back it up. Its mechanics were simple on the surface. You jump, shoot, and use your worm whip. But the way these were implemented was anything but basic. Every level felt like its own twisted mini-universe, packed with creativity and challenges. Take What the Heck, for example. This level throws you into a fiery underworld, complete with a demon lounge singer and a chilling Beethoven remix that somehow worked as a soundtrack. Or, for Pete's sake, where you had to escort a fragile puppy named Peter through hazards, making sure he didn't hulk out if you let him get hurt. These levels weren't just gimmicks, they were puzzles that tested your timing, reflexes, and ability to adapt to the game's sheer unpredictability. And let's not forget the humor. Earthworm Jim was dripping with personality. From the way Jim's suit turned him into a floppy, cartoonish action hero to the bizarre enemy design like Bob the Killer Goldfish, an actual goldfish in a bowl. The cutscenes, the dialogue, even the game over screen, it all oozed that irreverent 90s vibe that made it so distinct. Of course, Earthworm Jim wasn't perfect. The game was hard, sometimes a little too hard. Its difficulty could feel unfair in places, especially with the checkpoints spread thin in more chaotic stages. And while its humor was its biggest strength, it occasionally felt like the gameplay took a back seat to the game's eccentricity. Still, the impact of Earthworm Jim can't be overstated. It wasn't just a game, it was a cultural moment. The success of this game led to an animated series, toys, and even a sequel that pushed its zaniness even further. For a brief moment in the mid-90s, Jim was a bona fide gaming icon. So why did it land at number 5? Because while it was undeniably inventive and unforgettable, it doesn't quite hit the same heights as the other platformers on this list. Its charm and creativity earn it a spot, but its flaws keep it from climbing higher. But there's one thing for sure, no list of 90s platformers would be complete without it. Sliding into our number 4 spot is Donkey Kong Country, the game that proved the Super Nintendo still had some serious fight left in it, even in the face of next-gen competition. Released in 1994 and developed by Rare, this platformer wasn't just a game, it was a technical and artistic statement. With its groundbreaking pre-rendered 3D graphics, Donkey Kong Country looked like nothing else at the time. But it wasn't just about looking pretty, this game had gameplay chops to back it up. At its core, Donkey Kong Country is a fairly straightforward 2D platformer. You can run, jump, roll, and bop enemies on the head, but Rare added just enough depth to make it stand out. The tag team mechanic was a stroke of genius. You didn't just play as Donkey Kong, you could switch to Diddy Kong, each character bringing different strengths. Donkey was powerful, able to defeat bigger enemies, while Diddy was faster and better at precision platforming. It wasn't just about preference. Knowing when to use each Kong was key to mastering the game's challenges. And oh, those challenges. Donkey Kong Country was packed with variety, from classic platforming stages to minecart levels that felt like roller coasters of pure chaos. Levels like Minecart Carnage and Snow Barrel Blast kept you on edge with tight timing and relentless obstacles. Then there were the underwater stages, which slowed things down and introduced a whole different rhythm to the gameplay, complete with the soothing, and now iconic, aquatic ambience track. Rare made sure no two levels felt the same, keeping players hooked with new mechanics and surprises. And speaking of music, let's pause for a second to talk about David Wise's legendary soundtrack. From the tribal beats of DK Island Swing to the haunting serenity of aquatic ambience, the music in Donkey Kong Country didn't just set the tone, it elevated it to an entire experience. It's one of those rare soundtracks that can stand on its own and still feel timeless. Now, let's talk about impact. Donkey Kong Country was a massive hit, selling over 9 million copies and revitalizing the Donkey Kong brand, which had been a little dormant since the early 80s. It showed that the SNES still had life in it, even as Sony and Sega were pushing into the 32-bit era. More than that, it established Rare as one of the premier developers of the 90s, a reputation they would build on with games like Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye 007. But as great as it was, Donkey Kong Country wasn't perfect. Its reliance on graphical wow factor led some critics to call it style over substance, and compared to other platformers of the era, its mechanics weren't always the deepest. While the game was fun and engaging, some levels relied a bit too much on trial and error, which could frustrate players. And as groundbreaking as the visuals were, they haven't aged as gracefully as the pixel art of its contemporaries. Still, there's no denying that Donkey Kong Country deserves its spot on the list. It's a game that redefined what was possible on a 16-bit console, and reminded everyone that the old gorilla still had some tricks up its sleeve. Its mix of innovation, charm, and flat-out fun makes it an unforgettable entry in the platforming pantheon, and a well-earned number 4. At number 3, we've got Crash Bandicoot, the name that put Naughty Dog on the map and made Sony a serious contender in the console wars. Released in 1996 for the PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot wasn't just a mascot-driven platformer. It was Sony's answer to Mario and Sonic. With its vibrant 3D visuals, quirky protagonist, and unique gameplay style, it carved out its own space in a crowded genre. What made Crash Bandicoot special wasn't just its cartoonish charm, it was how it used the PlayStation's hardware to create something fresh. This wasn't your typical open 3D platformer like Super Mario 64. Instead, Crash combined linear level design with 3D movement, creating what fans affectionately dubbed as hallway platformer. The camera followed Crash down tight, often claustrophobic paths, making the game feel like a roller coaster with one way forward, and every twist and turn was packed with hazards. The levels themselves were meticulously designed, whether you were dodging boulders in a heart-pounding chase sequence, carefully hopping across collapsing platforms, or weaving through traps in a jungle, every stage felt like it had its own identity. Take Native Forest, with its towering vertical climb through spiky traps, or Road to Nowhere, the infamous bridge level where one misstep meant an instant plunge into oblivion. These stages were more than just tough, they were memorable, creating moments players would talk about for years. Crash himself was an instant hit. With his goofy grin, manic energy, and slapstick animations, he felt like a cartoon character brought to life. He was fun to watch and even more fun to control. And let's not forget his nemesis, Dr. Neocortex, a villain so over the top that he became almost as iconic as the hero himself. But Crash Bandicoot wasn't just about looks and personality, it was also a showcase of Naughty Dog's technical ingenuity. The game used a technique called polygonal trickery, where levels were streamed in small chunks to maximize the PlayStation's limited memory. This allowed Crash to deliver detailed environments without sacrificing performance, something that set it apart from other 3D games of the time. It also helped the game's visuals stand out, with lush jungles, colorful temples, and volcanic wastelands that looked incredible in the mid-90s. Culturally, Crash Bandicoot became the face of PlayStation. He was a brash, slightly rebellious answer to Mario's squeaky clean image and Sonic's cool attitude. The commercials leaned into this rivalry, with Crash himself trash-talking Nintendo and Sega in one of gaming's most memorable marketing campaigns. The game sold millions of copies and solidified Sony as a major player in the console market. Still, there's no denying Crash Bandicoot's legacy. It was the game that defined a generation of PlayStation fans and proved that the 3D platformer could be just as engaging as its 2D predecessors. With its unique mix of charm, challenge, and technical innovation, Crash Bandicoot deserves its spot at number 3. It's not just a game, it's a piece of gaming history. Coming in at number 2 is a game that doesn't just define its era, it defines an entire genre. Super Mario World, released in 1990 as the launch title for the Super Nintendo, is often regarded as one of the greatest platformers ever made. It wasn't just another Mario game, it was the Mario game that showed what a platformer could be when everything came together just right. Gameplay, design, music, and innovation. It nailed them all. The first thing you notice about Super Mario World is just how polished it is. With every pixel feeling deliberate, every mechanic perfectly tuned, it took everything great about its predecessor, Super Mario 3, and expanded on it. The controls were tighter, the levels were more intricate, and the world felt bigger and more alive. This wasn't just a collection of stages, it was an interconnected journey across Dinosaur Land, where every level felt like it had a purpose. One of the game's most iconic features is Yoshi. For the first time, Mario wasn't tackling the adventure alone. He had a dinosaur companion who could eat enemies, stomp on spikes, and even grant unique abilities based on the color of the shells he swallowed. The introduction of Yoshi added a whole new layer of strategy to the gameplay. Figuring out when to use him and when to risk losing him made the game even more engaging. But Super Mario World wasn't just about riding a dinosaur, it was about discovery. Hidden throughout the game were secret exits and paths, many of them which led to entirely new areas. Finding these secrets felt like uncovering a whole other game. Remember the Star Road? Unlocking it opened up some of the most challenging and rewarding levels in the game. And if you managed to conquer those, you got access to the Special Zone, a collection of levels so difficult they still make seasoned players sweat. The rewards for exploration weren't just satisfying, they were groundbreaking for the time. Then there's the level design. Every stage in Super Mario World feels unique. From the ghost houses with their puzzle-like layouts to the aesthetic stages where precise platforming is the only way forward. Even the overworld map felt like a character of its own, with its branching paths, secrets, and subtle animations. This wasn't just a platformer, it was an adventure, one where you were constantly rewarded for experimenting and exploring. And of course, there's the soundtrack. Koji Kondo's compositions are instantly recognizable, from the cheerful overworld theme to the eerie, tension-filled ghost house music. The SNES's sound chip allowed for richer, more dynamic music, and Super Mario World took full advantage of that. These tunes didn't just set the mood, they became etched into gaming history. Now, why does Super Mario World land at the number 2 spot and not the very top? For all of its brilliance, it was still an evolution of Super Mario Bros. 3, rather than a revolutionary leap. It built a strong foundation and refined it to near perfection, but it didn't reinvent the genre the way our number 1 pick did. It's hard to fault a game for being almost too perfect at what it set out to do, but that's the trade-off. Still, there's no denying Super Mario World's legacy. It's a game that's as fun to play today as it was in 1990, and it set the standard for what a platformer could be. And should be. It's not just one of the best games of the 90s, it's one of the best games of all time. Taking the crown at number 1 is a game that didn't just define a franchise, it defined a console war. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, it wasn't just a sequel, it was a statement. Sega had one goal with this game, to prove that Sonic wasn't a one-hit wonder, and to cement him as a true rival to Mario. Spoiler alert, they succeeded. From the moment you hit the start button and heard the iconic Sega chime, you knew you were in for something special. Sonic 2 took the foundation laid by the first Sonic game and supercharged it. Everything was bigger, faster, and more polished. Sonic wasn't just a mascot anymore. He was the embodiment of speed, attitude, and coolness. And nowhere was this more evident in the game's level design. The stages in Sonic 2 are legendary. Emerald Hill Zone greets you with lush, vibrant greenery and introduces you to the game's blistering pace. But it's when you hit Chemical Plant Zone that the game really shows its teeth. The neon-soaked industrial setting, combined with the heart-stopping underwater sections, made it clear this wasn't just about speed. It was about challenge and precision. Later levels like Casino Night Zone brought a playful break with pinball mechanics, while Wing Fortress Zone pushed platforming skills to the limits with tight jumps and deadly traps. And then there's the Spin Dash. Introduced in this game, it became one of Sonic's signature moves. Simple yet revolutionary, it allowed players to build up a momentum from a standstill, giving them more control over Sonic's trademark speed. This wasn't just a fun mechanic, it was a game changer, giving the players new ways to interact with levels and approach obstacles. Sonic 2 also upped the stakes by introducing Tails, Sonic's two-tailed fox sidekick. While Tails could be controlled by a second player, he was just as effective as an AI companion, adding a layer of co-op fun to the experience. The game even teased its multiplayer potential with a split-screen versus mode, allowing players to race each other through select levels. It wasn't perfect, but it was a glimpse of how Sonic's world could expand. And let's not forget the finale. Sonic 2 gave us the first appearance of the Death Egg, Sega's riff on the Death Star, and pitted players against the iconic Mecha Sonic and Dr. Robotnik's massive final mech. It was an epic conclusion that felt cinematic in a way few other games of the era could pull off. Sonic 2's cultural impact was seismic. It sold over 6 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling Genesis games of all time. It proved that Sega could go toe-to-toe with Nintendo in the mascot wars, and it gave the Genesis its flagship title during the height of the console wars. Sonic wasn't just a competitor, he was a phenomenon, with the game spawning toys, comics, and even a cartoon series. Now it's not without its flaws. Some levels like Metropolis Zone were a bit too long and unforgiving, testing the patience of even the most seasoned players. The lack of its save functionality meant finishing the game in one sitting, a tall order, especially for the brutal difficulty spikes near the end. But those criticisms pale in comparison to what Sonic 2 achieved. It didn't just refine its predecessor, it redefined what a platformer could be. The combination of speed, skill, and style was unmatched. It wasn't just a game, it was an experience. And that's why Sonic the Hedgehog 2 stands tall as the best platformer of the 90s. It captured the spirit of the era and delivered it with a blue blur.
Sega is the current leader, but only by a slight margin. Effort to keep their edge.
And there you have it, the platforming heavyweights of the 90s, ranked and remembered. From Earthworm Jim with a whip to a hedgehog so fast he made caffeine seem redundant. These games weren't just great, they were milestones. Each one left a mark on the industry, whether through innovative gameplay, jaw-dropping visuals, or sheer cultural dominance. Sure, we could argue for hours who deserves the top spot, and we know some of you are already furiously typing. But that's the beauty of the 90s platforming scene. It was a decade overflowing with creativity, competition, and a little bit of chaos. These games didn't just define a genre, they helped shape an entire generation of gamers. So whether you're Team Mario, Team Sonic, or Team Why Isn't Cool Spot on this list, one thing's for sure, the 90s were wild, and we wouldn't have it any other way. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to blow into a cartridge and pretend my reflexes haven't gotten slower since middle school. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed exploring the top 5 platformers of the 90s, click this video here to see more from the Retro Reload. And, as always, thank you for watching.